They know that my mother and my father got divorced when I was little. They know those things, and we've talked through that. Not that I want to bring up old things, but I want to show them that life is a series of events, and how you respond to those events and how you come out of them determine how you're going to be and kind of set things in motion.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Biz Dad podcast. I am truly excited about our guest today, John Ballenger. I think he is going to provide some massive insight and excitement. If for nobody else, the conversation with me, I'm excited about it just to be able to chat with him. We've got a lot of things that we've overlapped on in life in various different spots, so I look forward to kind of chatting and digging a little bit deeper. But John, if you can, please introduce yourself, tell us about your family, and then a little bit about your business.
Yeah, Adam. Hey, first of all, thanks for having me on. I am equally as excited just to talk to you. So if it's the two of us today, then it's a
then
win.
It's a good one. Yep.
Yeah, it's a good one. So, Adam, I'm 20-year retired Marine, helicopter pilot by trade. Just retired in October, and relocated with my family to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and got a wonderful wife of 15 years. And our story is truly phenomenal, how God interwove our interactions to end up as a married couple. But we have two boys, 11 and 7. My oldest is Lincoln, youngest is Hudson. We had a daughter in between, but she passed away right after birth, 3 months after birth. So we're a happy family of 4, and man, loving this next chapter, trying new things, trying to expand my horizons. I purposely avoided going back into aviation and purposely avoided going into military contracting because those seem like somewhat safe bets that I wanted to try to grow from. So two or three things that I'm actually doing. One, I started with 2 other partners, a real estate development company, and that's based out of Oklahoma. And we're focused on just taking properties and really adding value to those and expanding the capacity and the capabilities of those properties. And also doing some coaching, some executive coaching, one-on-one coaching for individuals who are just seem to be stuck in a place that they need a little assistance getting out of, a little bit of accountability. So I do that for individuals, and I come in and speak to corporations just on anything and everything that they may need help with. So really excited to put my hand to different things, but it is also trying at times as well. So that's what I'm currently doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had a similar thing when I left. I was like, I've got zero desire to be the guy that took off the uniform, put on the suit, and sat in the same seat. Like it just, I did not want to didn't want to do that. Didn't want to. I ran away from pretty much everything that I was doing. I said, no, I'm not going anything near that. So I hear you on that one. But man, I typically I jump in and try to ask about your father, but my daughter is 5 months old right now, and it literally wasn't expecting to hit so emotionally so quickly at the beginning. Just thinking about that, like I could not imagine what you went through. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that? If for no other reason, then I'm going to control my emotions while you talk. So.
Sure. Yeah, Adam. It's interesting. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of dads, new dads, that say I can never go through what you went through. And I like to challenge that because God has made us very resilient. God has made us to want to have faith. And so our daughter was born on Christmas Day, and a couple weeks early, but not too much, and no expected complications. She was our second child, so we of course did all the screenings and all the tests, and thought everything was going to be work out perfectly. So it was born Christmas Day. We showed up at the hospital. We were stationed on Hawaii at the time, on Oahu. And immediately after she was born and I was able to cut the umbilical cord, the nurses rushed her out of the room. Lack of pulse and very shallow. If she was breathing at all, it was very shallow. And they put her in an incubator and started working on her. Well, there's only one NICU, neonatal intensive care unit on Oahu, and that's in Honolulu. So they had to rush her from the east side of the island where we were in Kailua over to Kapiolani Hospital. And there she was for 86 days. And they ran a full battery of tests. Every day was something new. Every day was something different, a new strategy, a new thing, a new discovery. Some days were high, some days were low. And it was interesting because we at no time knew really what was going on. Found out probably month 2 that there were only 2 cases in the world that were documented similar to hers. And in those 2 cases, both child died within 4 months. So that gave us, something to work off of. And ironically, when we were told that, our faith only increased. Unfortunately, her lungs, heart, and kidney all started failing at different points in her stay at the hospital. And on the 86th day, we had to say goodbye. And it was really interesting because the whole time she was at the hospital, my wife and I's faith continued to grow. It continued to, we just got bold. I mean, I told doctors that I was going to walk out of the hospital with my daughter. I told the Marines that I was working with, I was the maintenance officer at the helicopter squadron at the time. I told 150 of them that I was going to walk my daughter back into the squadron one day, and they were going to get to meet her. So just bold words, bold actions. And when she passed away, it had some pretty devastating effects. My wife obviously took it the hardest, and she really had to dig deep and figure out what she truly believed. And we have been believers. We've both been raised in the church our whole lives. And it was really hard. And she had a really hard time going back to faith and going back into church and being in those circles. But I just told her, 2 things. One, I said, we lost our daughter. I'm not going to lose you. Mm-hmm. And the second thing was, that if we have to go back to the basics and we have to start all over, let's just focus on one thing. I love you. God loves us, and we're together. So let's start with, just working on that. And, it's been 8 years now, and I will say that she has made a drastic return back to her former self. And she's still on fire and still believes in healing and faith. And, it didn't happen to us, but that's okay. And that gives us a story to tell, to do this, right? To sit in front of each other and talk about how the struggle is real and how faith doesn't always pan out into the perfect scenario, but we still believe and we still keep going on. And so, so we took a pause and just kind of tried to reconstruct our family and our faith and who we were. And then we were blessed with a 3rd child, Hudson, who came a year and a half after Brooklyn. So now, like I said, we're a family of 4, and we're incredibly happy and incredibly excited to see our daughter in heaven one day.
Yeah.
So,
wow, that is, that's, I mean, it of course hits me, I think, a little stronger since I have a little 5-month-old little girl hanging out over there, and I could not imagine. And it's one of those things that through, you never know, how you're going to react until something like that happens. And I'd love, obviously faith had a huge impact for you in being able to work through that. And those types of trials and those types of tests, either, if we stay with it, our faith ends up being way stronger at the end of it than it was at the beginning. And I'm speaking as if I've ever lost a child, and I couldn't, and that's not the intent, but more just trials and tribulations as life life throws at us, right? And it's let me ask about your wife going through that, right? And how were you best able to support your wife through that? Especially like now she's not only obviously heartbroken about losing her daughter, but now obviously probably angry at God and what, like, for even allowing that type of thing to happen. Because it's one thing for us to have conversations that we just throw out in the ether as far as like, how does God let tragedy happen? But it's another thing to look at and say, okay, yeah, but that tragedy is now right here. Like it's not not this tragedy out there. But so can you? How did you best support your wife through that, or maybe how did you fail to support your wife through that you would love to do over if you could?
Yeah, it was a time of a lot of learning. One, learning about communication, learning about the grieving process, learning about support. When there's an 83% chance families will separate when there's a death of a child. And one of the doctors told us that before we even left the hospital, before our daughter was even, had even
way to put that
away.
in my brain. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah. But so that tells me two things. One, there's a really small chance you can stay together, but there's a chance, right? The odds are against you, but man, if you are one of those people that say, you know what, I like those odds because somebody's making it. Let's figure out what they're doing. So I had to learn a couple things. One was communication. We obviously, men and women, communicate vastly different. And I had to quickly figure out that sometimes not saying anything, not having the answer, not being able to fix the problem, as most guys want to do, is okay in this scenario. Some of the best remembrances I have of us grieving together is me just arm around my wife, weeping together because there's no words that you can say. And for guys, it's kind of weird that we think, well, I got to say something. I want to provide something, very philosophical that can fix this problem, but it can't. So sometimes just sitting in silence does the trick. Another thing that we had to really work through is the grieving process. And I like, I tell people, my wife and I both got to experience our daughter for 86 days on earth. But for my wife, she had her in her belly for 9 months. That is a much longer relationship, a much harder thing to grieve. And my wife and I talk about losing, a child that's 22 years old or 30 years old. It's the longer you spend with them, obviously, the more attached you become. But my wife was very, very grieved, where I had 86 days. All 86 days were spent in the hospital, in a very isolated environment and very sterile. But the way I would grieve is I would take my surfboard or my stand-up paddleboard far out in the water. And out there, I would get angry. I would shed tears. I would beat the water and yell at God and try to figure out why this happened. And I would come home and I would be okay. My wife would be home with our 2-year-old son grieving. I would be over it for the day and she would be in the thick of it. So she couldn't see me grieving. And so for a while, it was a very hard thing to communicate because she never saw me grieve. So she thought I was okay with it or I was over it and I had moved on. Where in reality, we were just grieving two different ways. And so when it was a struggle to communicate that until I realized she just wanted to hear that I was having a tough day, or I thought about Brooklyn, or something reminded me of her, or I saw a girl, a 5-year-old girl that, man, that could have been our daughter, whatever. But the key was telling my wife, hey, this is what I'm dealing with today, instead of just thinking, I'm just going to keep it, submerged and not, I'll wait till it gets over. And so that was a big lesson for me. And then the third thing was just being patient, knowing that every Christmas day, we celebrate birth of Jesus and the birth of our daughter. And those are two joyous occasions, but one, obviously the birth of our daughter and then losing her later is very bittersweet. But she may grieve our daughter until I'm dead.
Yeah.
That may be a reality, and that's okay with me now. I always thought it was something that you eventually just get over. In reality, you never truly lose that memory. You never truly lose that experience, no matter how old your child or that person you lose may be. So just, it was a lot of me not trying to fix the communication, the grieving, or the timing of it. And in that, we've learned a lot about each other and the way we both work. And I think that's made our marriage so much stronger than it was 8 years ago.
I completely believe that. I think that goes to just about anything in your marriage, right? I mean, if the ability to communicate and tell each other what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're, in typical man fashion, we tend to just push things down and grieve in our own way, away from everybody else, so nobody has to see tears come out, or nobody has to see anything. It's just, no, I'll figure this out and get it done. But the communication side of the house, and even if it's not grieving, even if it's you didn't like something that your wife did, or whatever, like, if you're not saying it out loud, then it's sticking somewhere. It's going to come out somewhere at some time, at some point, in some way, and you guys are going to get angry at each other, or something's going to happen. So I mean, communication is something I was absolutely horrible at for the first few years of my marriage, right? It was I had no idea how to communicate with people. I was a military guy for a long time, and my communication style was a knife hand and a loud voice, and that was it. That was what I knew how to do, and that's I was trained how to do it, and that's what I did. And I don't know if you know this, but giving your wife a knife hand is probably not the wisest way to go about your day. But I would venture to guess it was dreadful for my wife at the beginning without my ability to communicate. So I'm glad that I learned before we had some of traumatic experiences in our marriage. Yeah. But because learning during that process, that would probably be why those 83%. I would venture to guess. And I mean, you let me know, like you mentioned, doing some research and learning how all this was done. So outside looking in, I would venture to guess that two things, and tell me if I'm off based on this, based off what your understanding is. One, they probably didn't have those 83% probably didn't have a strong or similar faith background, because that tends to hold people together a little bit more. And two, they likely had an inability to communicate prior. So if you don't have those two things to begin with, right, I would venture to guess is going to make any tragedy or anything that much harder. So throughout your, and again, I'm just making this up on the spot based off of my understanding of relationships and all of that. But you mentioned doing some research. Was there anything like learning how all of this happened, learning about those 17% that did survive? You are now a part of that 17%. What did you find was was there any commonalities between those?
Well, so I didn't dig deep, okay. Adam. I'll tell you what the secret to our success was. One, it was absolutely our faith, common cornerstone that we had and belief in God. But two, we spent 3 years of our relationship, 3 years long distance. I was in flight school when we met. I was going from Pensacola to North Carolina for flight training, and then North Carolina to San Diego. And she was a school teacher out in Northern California. And all we had was the phone. I mean, this is pre-Skype and, before Zoom and everything. So every night it was us sitting on the phone. And every night when things would get awkward, or you wish that you could just go, do something else or walk away, or all we had was the phone call. And we just had to sit there and work through those verbal difficulties. And doing that for 3 years, long distance, allowed us to talk about anything and everything under the sun. I mean, I joke with people and tell, people that ask about marriage, oh, how was the first year? How was it moving in with each other? And I said, I literally knew where she was going to keep her toothbrush the night we got married because we talked about it. Everything gets discussed over 3 years. And that truly started, again, our foundation of communication, so that when this huge thing hits, it does take you off it takes you out of your stance, and you have to change your posture a little bit. But we already had that communication piece in our story. And so it was so much easier to say, let's start over. Let's go back to what we do know. All these truths that we knew before we even had kids and all these things. But you're right. In the 17%, communication is usually the underlying factor when couples are already allowed to or able to discuss, especially hardships or financial difficulties or these things, and they have to verbally communicate through them. They're usually more well equipped for these difficulties that lie ahead, like a loss of a child.
How were you able to learn how to communicate better with your wife? So for me, I joined the military at 18 years old, right out of high school. Was already not very good at communicating in high school. I was very small. I was, I was a late bloomer in a lot of ways. So I just wasn't confident in myself to be able to communicate very well. And then the military only taught me how to yell at people. Like I said, I was a cop for quite a while in the military. So that was one of those, like, you just yell at people all the time type of things, very Army-like, kind of Air Force-like. But I would venture to guess for me, I would have, and I know I already told you I was terrible at the beginning, communication-wise at the beginning, but where did you get your skills to actually be able to communicate? Was it during that trial? Was it before that? Was it, how did you kind of work through that to get to the point where you were able to do that with your wife at that point?
Well, I would like to say that, God designed it where we got our communication through our long distance relationship and then through marriage. We waited 4 years after we were married to start trying to have kids. And so in that time, we had 7 years to communicate without kids running around and without the, diversions that life provides us sometimes when things get difficult and you can immediately turn your focus on something else. So you have to sit there and really work through difficulties. But we actually, when we were in DC, I was there for a year for mid-level career course, and our pastors at our church that we were going to asked us to lead a small group, home small group for married couples, dating couples, and couples that were engaged. And we said no. We said, no, I don't think you understand. We've only been married for 2 years. We're not the right couple. And they said, no, that's exactly why we want you to lead this course. And we hesitated. And then finally we said yes. Well, the course was called Love and Respect. It's how women need love and men need respect. I mean, out of all the things that we need, women have this underlying desire to be loved by their husbands, and men need to be respected by their spouses. And we taught that course, and it taught us so much about communication and this, what the author calls the crazy cycle, right? Where you get mad and you fight and you storm out the door, and it kind of just perpetuates itself. Where if you're able to stop that cycle and say, okay, what I said was this, but it came out different, or I didn't intend for it to be that way, and let me show you how I truly love you to my wife. And she could say, this is how I respect you, and this is, let's kind of hit reset. I mean, that was a game changer for us. Love and respect. And we had no idea what would lay down the road for us, and how communication would be so vital to our relationship. But looking back, I would say that was something that helped us come prepared.
That's that's awesome. I've just recently started a small group for my church, and it's with couples with kids and all this stuff. So I'm definitely going to have to look that one up to see if I should start to look at that one for the next go around. But very similarly, my wife and I, while the wedding planning was happening, my wife was deployed to Iraq. I was going to college, and I'm the one doing all the wedding planning. We're doing lots of phone calls, all the stuff. And it's just today, we were having a conversation about how there was one point where I'm trying to have a conversation with my wife. I could not hear anything she was saying. She's in Iraq, and I'm like, I cannot understand anything you're saying. And then there was a guy in the background that was trying to make a joke about I don't even remember what the joke was about, but it was something to do with my wife, my fiance at that time. Yeah. And I heard him clear as day, and I couldn't understand anything she was saying. I was so angry that I was like, "What in the world is going? Like, you got to be kidding me!" And she was like, "How did you even hear that?" And then, of course, that was the wrong response for me to want to hear. Well, it doesn't matter how I heard it, you know. And now I'm like, now like the ability for us to finally work through a lot of those issues helped much later on in our marriage, right? But again, we did the same thing. We waited 4 years before we really started trying to have kids, and then we had our first kiddo after being married for 4 years. And I mean, sitting down with just the two of you, and I think really, we've been married for 13 years, so you've got us by 2 years. But I don't remember there being a ton of, 13 years ago, there probably wasn't much. There wasn't a ton of the social media stuff. We may have had a MySpace, right? We probably had. I would venture to guess I had Facebook by that point. But I mean, I don't even know, right? So there wasn't a lot that stopped us. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have any of that stuff. Yeah. So you sat down, you watched a movie together. You sat down, you had conversations. You actually sat at the dinner table and you ate together without the TV on, with all the stuff. And like today is so much more difficult to just sit there and have a conversation with your spouse.
It is.
Like, I don't understand. I tell people I don't know how people have daughters in school right now, like that are teenage daughters in school right now. Like I'm glad that my daughter's only 5 months old. I could not have a teenage daughter in school right now. I would go absolutely crazy. It's hard enough to have a teenage son, let alone teenage daughters going through what they're going through right now with everything. But man, oh man, like what kind of things do you still do now that help you with your communication, that you guys do or not do, or things that you're trying to make sure that you're keeping those knowledge, skills, and abilities sharp?
That's a great question. We do commonly go back to that love and respect book, and we do find ourselves, and it's kind of, I don't want to say tongue in cheek, but because we do actually use it, but we will find ourselves going back and saying, my wife's name is Ryan. I said, Ryan, I know what I just said sounded like this, but what I was trying to say is this. And then you have to follow it up with, will you please forgive me? Man, that's like the secret, right? That's the Cliff Notes version, is admitting what you just said and saying you're sorry and genuinely meaning it. But we do go back to that. And we do joke about, difficulties, because we have to remember where we came from and the things that challenged us, because there's going to be new challenges. But if we can't remember those small victories that we came through, then it should be fun, right? The relationship should be fun. And I say sorry a lot. I say I'm an idiot a lot, and we try to keep it pretty casual. Another thing that I did tell my wife very early on is I said, hey, I said the bed's for two things, and talking's not one of them. So let's get our discussions out before we go to bed. Because I want to go to bed. I want to hold you tight. I want to be in peace. Go to bed, not angry. And we found ourselves early on in our marriage, as soon as we would lay down, she would want to talk, and I would be out like that. And it drove her crazy. How can you fall asleep? I was right in the middle of a subject, right in the middle of something, telling him something. That's just the way I'm wired. And so I said, hey, let's, instead of going through this cycle, doing this over and over, I'll tell you, hey, I'm 30 minutes from going to bed. And she knows that, like, that's okay. That's a good window for us to talk about something if we need to. And that saved a lot of heartache as well. But, when you're talking about Iraq and your wife being there, I too was helping my wife plan a wedding. I was in Iraq and she was in California. But I don't know if you remember way back in the day when we would call with those phone cards, they'd give us like the USO phone cards, and you'd type in the 20-digit number, and then you type in the phone number, and you have to wait. And then there was like this 8-second delay, right? It's the most awkward thing, when you're trying to talk about what napkins to pick for your wedding.
Of course.
And you're like, do you like the green ones or the purple ones? And then there's just a long silence. And they're like, do you like and then all of a sudden she responds back, and it's like, that actually taught me a lot, because, right? Why did God give us 2 ears and 1 mouth? So we hear more, speak less. I would have to say what I want to say, sit there in silence and wait and wait for that response. And then she would respond and then ask a question. And that taught us actually a lot about patience and just letting somebody finish what they want to say before you jump in and have to either correct or administer guidance or something like that. So huge lessons that I didn't really anticipate getting out of deployments and things like that.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I think I'm thankful that I was not married or in a relationship during any of my deployments, because I'm sure that would have been a struggle session through those phone calls and all the stuff. And I was like, oh golly. I remember one time, completely tangent, but we were sitting so I was at a small fob in Baghdad. And, we're sitting there on the internet typing things out to whoever you're chatting with or whatever you're researching or whatever. And there was this guy next to me, clearly talking to who I would assume was his girlfriend or his wife, but he had like this graphic novel, and he was like typing whatever he would read off there, because he couldn't think of anything himself. He's like just typing all of these things to his wife and sending them out. And I was like, what in the world? So then he'd just sit there and wait, and then he'd get a response back, bling, and he's like, all right, let me type something else out from this book. And I was like, oh man, that's ridiculous. But it was comical nonetheless. But but probably easier than dealing with the phone cards and all of the stuff, because at least it was just it's the best. But sorry, tangent. All right, so now I'm going to change things up a little bit again, and go back to one of the questions I really do like to ask. Now, one of the reasons I like to ask this question about people's fathers is I learned a lot about my dad much later in life. There's a guy I listened to, Patrick Bet-David. He got it from somebody else, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically like you go through 3 phases with your dad, where you idolize him, you vilify him, and then you what's the other one? It's not respect, but then you learn to respect your father, right? Like you idolize him as a much younger kid, and then you get a little bit older, and you're like, oh, my dad is terrible. I can't believe it. Like he doesn't know anything, and then finally you learn to understand who he actually is. And it wasn't until I was probably in my early 30s before I really understood who my dad was, and where he came from. So I like to ask a little bit with that context, ask a little bit of about who your dad was and what it was like growing up in your family, and wonder if you had any experiences like that where you started to learn a little bit more about who he was that changed your perspective on him.
Yeah. My dad's done a lot for me. When he got married, they quickly had my mother, and he quickly had me. And my mother went through postpartum and had some difficulties with the new lifestyle of having a child. My dad was the manager of the Tulsa airport, and my mother was a stewardess on American Airlines. So, you think about the lifestyle back in the mid 70s, late 70s, very glamorous. Flying was still kind of in its golden era, and that time where it was a high lifestyle and a lot of thrills. And so they were often doing a lot of fun and seemingly exciting things. Well, my mother didn't adapt to having a son very well. And so a couple of years later, they got divorced, and my dad won 100% full custody of me in the early 80s, if that tells you anything. She was abusive and negligent and neglectful. And so he had full custody of me for a couple of years, and then he got remarried. But in that process, obviously I was too young then to know what I know now, but I realized he had resilience to take on a son as a single father in the early 80s and try to raise me, and he did the best he could. And it was an awesome job, actually. And I spent, for an early part of my elementary years, I spent a lot of time over at friends' houses, spending the night with friends 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week. And I always thought that was the normal thing until I until my dad got remarried, and that stopped. But he leaned on his community. He leaned on the families around us to help raise me. And so I truly respect some of those men that took on that opportunity as well and raised me kind of like their own to help my dad. But he got remarried and has been remarried ever since. And I have a stepbrother and a stepsister. But early on, when my father got married, he let me know, hey, this is your mother. This is who's going to help raise you. You will call her mom. You will respect her. And that's how it was, and it was a different time back then where, and I was in Tulsa, living in Tulsa. It's a very religious area, buckle the Bible belt, right? And at the time, nobody liked to talk about things that they were going through. So it was a very hidden, relatively little spoken about event, this divorce. And it's always been that way. So while I think he did a phenomenal job raising me and giving me the principles that I have now and the structure that I have now and the ability to withstand different things that come up in life, he gave me all those things. I'm trying to take it a little bit different, and I'm trying to just be a little bit more open with my kids. One of my boys' favorite times, we eat dinner together every meal. Every night we eat dinner together. There's no technology at the table. And one of the favorite questions that my boys like to ask is, Dad, and they pick an age, Dad, tell us at 8, when you were 8, what's one thing you did right and one thing you did wrong? Or what's one thing you did good and one thing you did bad? And we get to answer, and sometimes you have to keep looping some of the stories because you can't remember all of them. But we try to just be open with each other and share. And they know that my mother and my father got divorced when I was little. They know those things, and we've talked through that. Not that I want to bring up old things, but I want to show them that life is a series of events, and how you respond to those events and how you come out of them determine how you're going to be and kind of set things in motion. So we talk about everything. And so my dad and my stepmom, they're missionaries now. They've been missionaries in Mongolia for the last 20 years, and they've been doing a phenomenal job. And they raised my brother and my sister, very well. And I'm probably in that third stage now where I've gone from the resentment to the revere and the respect, and really just appreciative for the notion and for the I guess the desire that he had to raise me as best as he could when he could have walked away. He could have put me up for foster care. He could have, done whatever. But no, he stuck with me and raised me even when times were tough. So, yeah.
So let's back up to any of the resentment phase. What were the things that you did resent?
One of the things that comes to mind first is my dad, when he got out of the running the airport, he went into business for himself. And he his father was never at his basketball games or his events. And my dad played basketball for Texas Tech. And he said he never made one game. So I'm going to be there for all your games. And at first I appreciated that. But then as I started getting older and his business started adapting a little bit, I would look over in the sidelines when I'm playing soccer and see him on the computer or on the phone or talking to somebody else. And then he went from working in an office and he decided he wanted to work at home. And at first I thought that's great. And he would say, I want to work at home because I want to be around the family. But I started to see when I would come home from work or come home from school, I'd say hi, walk by the office, change, walk back by, say hi, and then at dinner time, my mom would say, okay, go up and tell dad it's time for dinner. So I'd go up there, tell him it's time for dinner. We'd eat together and then he'd go back up and work. And so the frustration from all that is that I started to see the break between work and family time being blended together. And it got very, very foggy, right? And very hard to distinguish the two. And I said, Dad, in my mind, I'd say, Dad, if you're going to come to a game, why don't you watch the game? Why don't you watch me? Why don't you be present? Right. And that's a big topic now, is being present, not just being there. And so that was a thing that definitely stood out. And he'd always go back to, well, John, I'm always at your games. I go to every single one of them. And I'd say, okay, yeah, that's true. And he was a scoutmaster and he taught, in our church, taught the Sunday school. And so he was there. He absolutely was there and he was absolutely being present. But as I got older, that line kind of shifted and blurred. So that was definitely something that I said, when I grow up and I start working, I'm not going to work from home because I want to leave my work from my home. It's the same reason I never lived on base. I never wanted to go from work and stay on base and live there, even though it's a great opportunity and phenomenal facilities. But I wanted that separation. When you drive out the gate, you leave everything back at work. And then when you come home, you kind of are able to, reinvent yourself for the night. And so, yeah, that's definitely one of those things. I think another one is talking about hardships. My mother, my birth mother, committed suicide when I was a sophomore in college. And she tried to reach out to me a couple times before it happened. And my dad really kept me sheltered from my mom, even when I wanted to kind of rekindle that relationship. And so I missed some opportunities where I think she was truly reaching out for help and truly reaching out to figure out who her son was, right? And how did he turn out? And he kind of kept me sheltered from that. In his mind, he was keeping me sheltered from potential heartache, but I wanted to experience that. I wanted to see what my past, the other half of my past, and I didn't get to do that. And so I missed out on that opportunity. And so I did harbor for a while a little bit of resentment for not being able to discover the other side of my life. But I also wholeheartedly believe in Romans 8:28, which says, for those that believe, all things happen for good. And I truly believe that everything in our life happens, whether we think it's good or not, it turns around and it ends up being for our benefit. And so I can look at each one of those things that I just described and say, I think they're all for good.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's even though it doesn't necessarily feel like it's our good, in the end, it's going to be God's good, right? So,
absolutely,
even if we don't see it on this side, I think the first thing you mentioned hits a little bit harder at the, especially when you look at today, as you and I are sitting in a home office. Before we started recording this call, my son came in and we were chatting and all the stuff, right? And I find that it's I blur those lines rather often between work and fatherhood, because I am here, and there's a few steps I look at with your dad, right? Like he did what he thought was the best thing, which was to at least be there, which was something he never had. And then, obviously you looked at it going, yeah, but you might as well not be here because you're really not here, so now you're trying to change to be present. And, I did, my dad wasn't at any of the games. I think I remember maybe two. There's one in particular I remember. It was a wrestling match and I lost and I was very angry. And I went slamming into the locker room. And my dad was like, "It's all right, you did good." And I was like, "No, I didn't." And he had never seen me wrestle before, so he didn't know if I was good or bad, any difference. And of course, I lost when he finally showed up. So it was like a thing for me that I was like, I want to be there for all of these things. And then you convicted the heck out of me because once in a while I'm at my son's golf match. These are 4 hours long. I'm like walking around with him for 4 hours. So I pull my phone out once in a while, check a message, do some things. And I'm thinking to myself now, it's like, sure, like don't. Why am I doing that still? Right. So I'm trying to make it one more step, but that doesn't mean that I've got it where it needs to be. So what have you been doing that you're finding you're saying, okay, I don't want to do, because your dad had the same thought process, right? I don't want to do the things that I missed out on. And so now we're sitting here going, I don't want to do what I feel like I missed out on. So how do we find that balance of ensuring that we're not just running away from or running towards what we missed, but yet not giving them what they need? Like, how have you found that balance, or how would you recommend I find that balance of not only running towards what I felt like I missed, but also running towards what he actually needs, what they actually need?
Sure. Well, two things. One, I think it's interesting with your story, my story, and I think a lot of men's stories is that pendulum swings, right, really wide. The first time, or when you say, I'm going to be a father, I'm never doing this thing. And then we kind of bring ourselves back to more of a balance. But what worked for me is something that my wife said now 6 years ago. I applied to fly the president and go to the presidential helicopter squadron in Quantico. And I said to her, I had applied once before when we had no kids. It was kind of, in my mind, the perfect time. And I didn't get accepted. So I applied again. And now we had 2 boys. And things looked definitely different. And I was starting to see the end of my career. But I said to my wife, I said, I want to apply for this. And I want to try to get in. And she said, okay. I said, well, but there's going to be some difficulties. I mean, I'm going to be gone a lot. I'm going to be gone overseas. I'm going to be gone in the States, and it's completely random sometimes. And I can't ever dictate when I'm going to be home. I said, I think it's going to be taxing on our relationship and our relationship with the boys. And she said to me, John, I know that it's going to be difficult, and I know you're going to be gone a lot. But if this is something that you want to do, you need to pursue it. And I will be here for you. But when you're gone, you're gone. And when you come home, you're present. And it was like, it right there made it black and white. When I'm gone, get the job done. Do what I have to do. Of course, I'm going to call, and of course, I'm going to FaceTime and, do what I have to do. But when I'm gone, think about what's at hand. But when I come home, phone goes in the corner. I engage with my kids. I'm present. I have no excuse to be somewhere else because I've been gone for so long that this is my place of duty. And so it is harder now, getting out of the military and being in this fluid place where you're trying to find something that works. We do find ourselves, like this, talking to our kids sometimes. But I constantly go back to that conversation. And I'm like, okay, John, you're home. Be present. Put the phone away. Do it. Because our kids aren't going to, I don't want my kid remembering me with the phone in front of my face saying, Dad, some of our best conversations were with you talking. I want them I want to look them in the eyes. I want to get down on their level. I want to have those wrestling matches and those late night conversations, but you have to be present to get to the place where those things happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, as you were saying that, I thought to myself, like, middle of the week, this is one blessing about homeschool is it doesn't matter where we sleep, what we do. We pitched the tent in the backyard, slept in the backyard. We've been wanting to do this, and I failed miserably as a father in that moment. Like, I went in there and I thought to myself, all right, well, I've still got this appointment tomorrow, that thing to do tomorrow, this thing to do tomorrow. Okay, I'm getting to bed. And I lost such an opportunity to just sit in the backyard with my boys, have those conversations, enjoy that time, do that, like getting on their level. Like, this is something they've been wanting to do forever. It just kept raining and raining and raining. I couldn't do it on a weekend. We finally had a night. It was going to be good. And I just completely whiffed on the swing. Like, I completely missed the ball. And then I wake up in the morning and I'm not happy. I've got, like, I didn't sleep well. I've got work to do. I've got all this stuff. And then I missed the ball again in the morning. And I was like, no matter how much I talk to other people and I try to fix these things, like, I still am missing some of this stuff. So, I mean, it's constant work. Sure. What have you, like,
let me say though, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't say this. And 3-4 months ago, we had a real estate deal that we were working on very heavily, spending a lot of time on. And I went in to tuck my boys in for bed and lay with them for a few minutes. And my youngest son, Hudson, said, "Dad, could Mom just lay with me instead of you?" And I kind of looked at him and I looked back at my wife and I said, "Why, Hudson, why would you say something like that? It's my turn." And he goes, "Well, because you're always on your phone. When he's laying in bed, I'm on my phone."
Yeah.
And I talk about stab right through the heart. But I was breaking my own rule. I mean, I was not being present when I had the ability to be present and just lay there and hug him and pray over him and talk to him as he goes to sleep. And he said, "No, you're always on your phone." So I have to find those things. And I've told the boys, my wife and I both have told our boys, call us out. If you ever see us not looking at you when you're talking to us, like we demand they do for us, call us out. Say, "Dad, put away your phone." I mean, hearing a 7-year-old say, "Dad, put away your phone and listen to me," is like, that helps. That helps make your mission really clear.
Man, I'm definitely writing that one down. Yeah. I can't wait for my 4-year-old to do that to me. Like, I mean, it's funny because the 4-year-old will almost do it without being told they have to, right? Because they'll just grab the phone and pull it out of your hand and try to talk to you because they're just like, "Wow, it's just a barrier." Like, and literally for a 4-year-old, it's a physical barrier. Like, they literally can't see through the phone that's right in front of my face. So it's very easy for them to just go, "Hey, get that out of the way, Dad." But and it's funny because as you say that, what you're telling me is you're not perfect. Okay, well that's good
exactly.
to hear. And I try to tell it to my son all the time. I was like, okay, I think it was yesterday. I was like, all right, bud, because he is a lot like his mother and I, where we want to be perfect with everything. Like everything's got its place. I need to, like, if you're giving me a mission, if you're giving me a task, I need to do it. And I need to do it well. So if he's missing something, I was like, "Hey, bud, are you Jesus? Because he's the only perfect one I know of that has ever walked this land. And I don't think you're it." It's the same thing I tell my wife. I said, "I don't think you're Jesus with a skirt. So we might want to figure this out," as I throw my pen on the ground. But no, it's for me, it's always, I tell the boys 1% better every day. So that's something I need to always remind myself of as well. Like, if I can get 1% better every day, I'm going to be a much better father, a much better husband, a much better Christian. It's a never-ending process of growth.
Absolutely.
But so I want to go back again to your dad, right? So how did he go from managing a airport to being a missionary in Mongolia? That
it's
that math problem is a tough one to figure out. Yeah,
it does baffle me a little bit too. But they he once he left the airport, he had a stint of probably 15 years where he was an entrepreneur. He started a natural gas company and sold it, and then started another natural gas company and was involved in a lot of entrepreneurial things, right? He was probably in his second act trying to figure out, okay, if the airport is no longer a thing, who else am I? What else can I do? And so really exploring that. And, after a series of doing some of those entrepreneurial roles, he and my mother took a trip to Mongolia, and it was a 2-week trip, missionary trip. They had done they had done a couple other trips before to Africa and, other places, Philippines. And they went on this trip, and they came back and said, I think we need to go back. And so they kind of tabled the idea for a few months, and then they decided we're going to go back for 2 years and live there for 2 years. And that was ironically it was about the same time that I told them I was joining the Marine Corps. And they felt like that came out of left field. So I tell people I hit them up with something that was crazy off the radar, and then they had to one up me. But they went out for 2 years. And I remember them calling me and saying, we've been here for 2 years. It's time for us to come home, but we don't feel like we're supposed to. We feel like we need to renew our contract and go back for another 2 years. My mom was a veterinarian, so she was with a veterinarian organization out there. My dad was helping grow businesses. And they said, we feel like we need to go back. And they've been doing that now 10 times in a row, and they've been out there for 20 years. So,
wow.
It's very different, and it's really hard to understand too. When I went to left college and went to the Marine Corps, and they left and went to Mongolia, it's weird going back home for the first time when no one's home. Going back to your hometown and be like, well, I guess I'm going to hang out with my friends now. That's a really weird feeling, but I know they wouldn't do it any different again.
I suppose for them, it was perfect timing though, too, because you were leaving for the Marines. Like it didn't really, And they took my brother and sister over there, and my brother was, he was a sophomore in high school, and my sister was a couple years behind him. So very formative years in their life as well. But they went with them, and then when they graduated from high school, they both came back over to the States and started going to college. So, it's just different, right? It's not right or wrong. It's just different. But they've loved it. That's awesome. So you obviously retired from the Marine Corps. Well, before we hit the retirement part, I got to ask you, like the travel, running around with the president. So when did you start on Marine One, and when did you stop flying Marine One?
Yeah, so I went to the squadron in 2017. So it was President Trump's first year as president, and I was there for 5 years. So essentially got to fly with the Marine One or with President Trump for 4 years. And then the last year was a Marine One for President Biden, and left in the summer of 22. So just last year, and retired October. And then, so I've been out of it for almost a year now.
Awesome. So, obviously with all that travel and everything, your wife was obviously super supportive in, that she'd be there for you. How did I know that it wasn't perfect because we just established that neither one of us are perfect, so at least we can get over that part. But how were you able to kind of pull that aside? Because those are kind of demanding positions in a lot of different ways, right? In some ways, it's just quick phone calls, like you've got to be here right now. So how were you able to kind of balance that when you were home? And I usually say, like, balance is a complete misnomer when you're talking about trying to balance quote unquote work from family, especially when you're in a job like that. So what were some of the things that you did that you kind of to make sure that you were as present as possible with the kids, even though like you can't fully put that phone away because you're on standby pretty much all the time, I would guess. Yeah,
the first 3 years were easier, right, to have that delineation, because the first 3 years you're training, you're getting used to the aircraft, you're getting used to the mission, and your demand isn't as big. But as you become senior in the squadron, you find yourself either as a Marine One and a key billet holder, which is what my fourth year, I found myself doing. But the first 3 years, very easy to kind of know when you're going on a trip or going overseas and it's, while it's not regular, it's kind of scripted. So, 3 days out, you're leaving, for a trip. And I just tried to abide by my wife's rule, and her guidance of, hey, be present when you're here. That fourth year is where those lines started getting real foggy and gray. And I took over as the operations officer for the squadron. And I was a Marine One pilot. So I was one of the 6 or 7 guys that was dedicated to flying the president. And I was responsible for getting the schedule out on a daily basis and getting our mission kind of codified to give to the commanding officer. And I'll tell you, the demand was legit. And I felt like I was very successful at work. I was doing this high profile job as a Marine One pilot, and I was a staple in the squadron. I felt like a failure at home because I had 2 phones and they both sat right next to me all the time. And I was all constantly at dinner, pulling it out of my pocket, looking real quick, walking out of the room, looking at my phone real quick, always typing an email, typing a text, and I would tell my wife, like, it'd go 3 weeks and I didn't put the phone down. Election season, like, it was crazy. I was always on my phone, and I had to tell her, like, babe, I am so sorry. I feel like I'm failing at home. And she had grace and she had patience. And she said, you know what? I understand the demand is a little different. I understand you can't have that delineation like you want to, but she had grace and she gave me that room. And that was really the difference maker for me was having somebody that understood, had a demand, had a desire for me to really separate the two, but also said, you know what, I know that's not possible right now. So just do things the best as you can.
So society right now is telling us a lot of crazy things about any number of things. But what I've pulled out multiple times throughout this conversation and throughout my marriage, and I've heard it through a few different ways, it's like the number one choice you make in your life is who you marry. Right? That like it makes, like, once you're an adult, like that choice right there can make or break where you go in your life. And it sounds like it just, as with me, it sounds like you did a great job finding a woman who is supportive, who takes care of you is the wrong way of saying it, but like in that sense, takes care of you, right? And make sure that you feel supported and loved. How would you say, without repeating what we've talked about with the communication side of the house, telling folks who are looking at getting married, or how would you say, like, this is how important it is to find the right spouse, and how would you advise folks going about finding that spouse? I mean, obviously this is a podcast about dads, but at the same point, my view is, before you become a dad, you should probably become a husband. It's probably the wisest way to do that. Call me crazy, call me old-fashioned, become a husband first, then become a dad. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Man, I definitely don't know the secret. I was blessed to have a lot of things work into my marriage, and probably too long to get into right now, but I realized that God's hand was on my life and the life of my future spouse. And I know that because when I was in 3rd grade, my wife came to the same school that I was in Oklahoma through her mother getting divorced and moving out of state away from the situation. But her mother didn't have the financial ability to keep her in school. It was a private Christian school. Didn't have the finances to keep her into school. Well, that year, the school board was running a pilot program to sponsor a family to allow them to go to school for free. The board was tied and torn between, they had 2 spots, giving those 2 spots to 2 different families with 2 different kids, or one family with 2 kids. Well, my wife has a sister, and they were both about to get yanked out of school because of tuition. The senior board member was the tie-breaking vote, that determined if my now wife got that scholarship or got that sponsorship. And the senior member voted, I think it should be this family with two small girls.
Wow.
16 years later, I introduced my spouse, my fiance, to my dad. And my dad was weeping. And he told us this whole story. And he said, when I was in third grade, and my wife was going to school there, that he was the senior member of the board that picked that family should get the scholarship.
Wow.
So you take something like that, a story like that, and you say, holy cow, God is in that. I can never let that thing go. Yeah. There's so much value there. I mean, but that story aside, my brother asked me one time, hey, how did you find your wife? Like, she's amazing. I want to find a girl just like you. And I asked him, where are you looking? And at the time he was, newly out of college. He was living in LA and he was in the party scene. And he's like, well, I'm always at the clubs and I'm all, at bars, and I'm always finding girls and bringing them back home. And I was like, if you want a girl like the wife that I have, you're not going to find her there.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's important to figure out where you're going to look, right? Where is that pool of people that you're going to choose from? If it's at a church, like it was for me, don't look in the club.
Yeah.
If it's at the club, don't look in the church. Right. Second, iron sharpens iron. People grow stronger and better together when there's that ability to grind things out but also be very similar.
Yeah.
If you are, for me, I dated a girl that was Catholic and I was Christian, and my faith is very important to me. But I told my mom, I think we'll work it out. She's like,
it's close enough.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's close. It's close. It's close enough. My mom was spot on. It wouldn't have worked out.
Yeah.
And go after what you want. And somebody once told me, write down all the things that you want in a spouse and trust God that he'll provide. And there's big debates over is there one person or is there a collection of people? Like, I don't want to get into that argument, but I'm going to say that I wrote down those things on my list and every one of them were met. Every one of them. And it wasn't a super long, 72 item list. It was, 10 or 12 items, but 100%. And so that opportunity came when I got so frustrated with what I was trying to find and who I was trying to figure out was the right one. And I said, I'm done. I'd gotten cheated on. I was in flight school. I said, I'm done. God, I don't want to do this anymore. You're going to have to provide somebody.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, I met my now wife of 15 years. So a lot of rambling in there, but I think the biggest one is, where are you looking and what do you want? Because if you start to give up on those things that you truly want, that you think will truly make you happy, then that's changing the course of potentially your future.
That's funny. Like, part of that, I felt like you were telling my story, which is which is comical, right? Because that's the same thing. Like, I was looking in the church for a while, and by looking, I that's probably a little bit more active of a word than I should be using, right? I was scoping out the church for girls, right? And hoping that I would find one. And then finally I was like, whatever. And I found one that was not in the church, which was a horrendous idea. Like, and that's where I did the same thing and was like, I'm done. I can't, I don't know where I'm going to find my wife, but this can't be the way to do it. But going through that checklist, that's something that I would like. We do this for our businesses, right? Like, what are the things we need for our businesses to make them run? What are the things we need to make sure that our things are going? And then, but we don't look at it in our personal life. We don't look at it with our kids. We don't look at it with, whatever. But I mean, we implemented EOS in one of our companies in ADPI, and it was like when you look at your core values, right? There were certain things they said that this is pay to play. Like, you can't even be a part of the company unless you do these things. And then these are our core values, right? This is where we're going to hire and fire. So if there's got to be a list that you look at for your spouse, there's got to be a list that you look at, and I'm guilty of not doing this extremely well with the family, but these are the things that we have to do as a family. These are the things I have to look for in my spouse. And I remember that one day I was telling my mom, which I almost never told my mom about any of my girlfriends. I was always, embarrassed to talk about that sort of thing. Like, I never felt like that door was open.
Right?
It was like, I never felt like, and this is another thing that I talked to my wife about. Like, I never felt like the door was open to talk about it because everything was so taboo, right? So I just never did. And then finally, I was like, I think I'm going to marry this one. And my mom, what did she tell me? Oh, well, you better pray that if that she's the right one, that she lasts, and if not, that she's gone. And I was like, really? This is the conversation you want to have with me? I finally tell you, and you tell me to marry, or you tell me to pray that she leaves? Like,
I think your mom was my mom.
See, yeah, it was ridiculous. So I did. Yeah. I followed my mom's instructions and I prayed. And the next morning I was like, yep, I'm totally going to marry her. Like, I just knew, like, it was going to happen. And sure enough, I did. But I cannot express enough how important what you said is like, make that list, understand who it is that you're marrying, right? It's no wonder that divorce is so high when you look at where we're finding our spouses and what society is telling us is okay. I mean, there was, I don't remember who she was. I think she was a porn star that was like putting out this thing. Oh, like, if you're not happy with who you're married to, it's not like marriage is like this big thing. Just get rid of them. Like, if they're not, and it's like, well, it's a big thing if you let it be a big thing, because it is a big thing. But if you tell yourself it's nothing, and it's like that old pair of shoes that the second there's a hole in it, you can just throw it in the garbage, then that's what you'll do. That's what you'll look at your marriage as. Like, but no, it's a sacred thing that you should be focused on, that you are going to have hard times in. There's going to end up being a hole in that pair of shoes, but it doesn't mean you can't fix the hole. It doesn't mean you can't still, like, make it work. Like, that's why you got married. And if you have the right values up front and you have those right thought processes working together and that communication that we talked about, and I still, again, as a Christian, think that, like, that alignment is extremely important. And like, talk through those things, work on it, make sure that it's going the right way, and don't, like, society's going to tell you any number of things, and if society's telling you it's right, it's probably not. Let's probably go the opposite direction.
That's true.
Yeah. But so business wise, I want to pivot over there a tiny bit. I like to kind of chat a little bit about the family side of business and the business side of family, and where you might be involving, especially now that you have a little bit more opportunity to be right there with the kids, where you didn't before. Like, do you already have plans in place, or are you already doing anything to involve the kids in your various different business ventures, whether it's real estate or talking to them about the coaching that you do or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I try to be, again, transparent and talk to them. If they've got a question, I try to answer it as honestly as possible. And I try to encourage questions. I'll say, hey, boys, they'll ask me on the way to school, what are you doing today, Dad? Because in their mind, I just sit at home and, talk to my friends on Zoom, but I'll say, well, today Dad's got 3 coaching clients. Oh, okay. Well, what is coaching exactly? Because they've got a coach, right? And I'm a coach on one of my son's soccer teams, but they don't. The coaching idea doesn't always sit well with them or sit right with them. So I explain, well, so and so is making these big business decisions, and I'm trying to help them out with kind of a mindset and walking them through what I actually do as an executive coach or success coach or life coach or whatever the term is, and how I try to champion those people that I'm in front of. And they'll say, well, Dad, what about your real estate? Are you still doing that? Yeah, of course I am. But unfortunately, the project I just spent 8 months on and talked about a lot at the dinner table, it fell through because of interest rates or because we didn't have the right investors. And I try to talk through those hardships. And so they're getting a better idea of what I spend my time doing. They are kind of wrapping their heads, okay, Dad used to go do this thing where he wore a uniform and got in this helicopter and flew this thing, and it was very, defined who I was. And now it's, well, Dad, you're going to have coffee with somebody? Like, why are you having just coffee with them? Why are you not going to work? And I'm like, well, today work looks like this. It looks like a coffee with, a potential investor or a potential coaching client or, whoever. So I try to have those conversations a lot and then ask them to provide me feedback. What did you not understand about what I just told you? Or what questions do you have? Or would you be interested in doing something like this when you got older? So trying to open the aperture for them in ways that I never, had open for me. When I was 7 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut and a basketball player and fly airplanes. It was very, I had one of 8 options, firefighter. And I was like, no, that's too hot. And, whatever. So I just tried to involve them and tried to keep the conversation flowing so that they better understand what I'm working for and where this energy is coming from, where it's going to, and why. What's my why? What's my purpose? What am I doing this all for?
Awesome. Do you have any conversation with them about what I don't know, it's probably not on this level, but what their why is on what they're doing in their life? Obviously, I think they're 11 and 7, you said. So yeah, their why is a little bit different right now than anything else. But like, to me, why is it like, I tell them to ask why all the time, because I think it's an extremely important question to ask all the time. And like, I know a couple podcasts ago, I mentioned to somebody, I said, that's probably one of the reasons why it was time for me to leave the military, because I ask why way too much, and they don't really like that usually. Like, they don't like to answer the question why. Because I said so is usually the answer, or because the reg says, But yeah, do you talk through, or do you have them work through their own whys as far as what they're doing and that type of stuff?
I do, Adam. It's pretty comical at times how short focused, right, that they can be. Hey, Lincoln, what's your why? Why do you know why we tell you to do really good at school and make good grades? And a lot of times it's no, I don't. My oldest is like, no, you tell me. Tell me what it is. And my youngest he's dialed in and he kind of knows those things. But I will ask that question and then try to help provide context. Because I think when you and I were growing up, it was go to school, get good grades so you can go to more school and get more grades so you can get a job and make a lot of money. In the story, period. And don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex without, without being married, right? Those were the rules that we lived by. And for that time, it worked. Right. My dad told me at 13 years old, don't get a tattoo and don't get a girl pregnant. If you do either one of those things, I'm kicking you out of the house and you can figure out how to make your own way. And it worked because I didn't get a girl pregnant until she was my wife, and I got a tattoo after my first deployment.
Smart thinking.
But now the kids are so much more inclined to ask those deeper questions. We are on the hook to provide the answers. Because if we can't provide the answers, someone else will, and it may not be what we want them to hear, or it may be too soon, right? That their minds aren't bold, aren't developed enough to contain the information that they're receiving. So it's our duty to give them the information that they need in the right doses at the right times. Yeah,
it's. I used to tell people all the time when it came to. This was when it came to like divorce and stuff like that. It's like, you're going to impact your kid whether you're in the house or not, right? You're the dad. You're going to impact your child. Do you want to impact your child while you're in the house, or do you want to impact them while they're away? And there's far too many dads that they're in the house and they still don't make the impact and don't have those conversations and don't like do those things. And your kid's going to go find the answers. They're gonna, I used to work a lot of child crimes against children type of stuff. And that was one of the things that it was almost always a factor. Where was dad, right? There was almost, if dad wasn't there, you could almost guarantee that there wasn't a present father around the victim. Because if there was a present active father, those conversations were had and those things were going on, and like they had that dad to be able to interact with. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but rather often you could do the same thing with looking at a lot of, let's say school shootings, right? You can almost guarantee the dad wasn't around in almost every one of them. Like, you can make that assumption, and I would say 99% of the time you're going to be right. Dad may have been in the house, but they weren't around. So there's a difference between, this goes right back to, there's a difference between showing up to my sports game and being present at my sports game. There's a difference between living in the house and being my dad while in the house. And I like foot stomping that to me is unbelievably important, because I saw way too much of it in my previous jobs. How south it can go, like really far south it can go, right down to whether you find a child victim, or you find even a 22-year-old kid that decided that he had nowhere else to go, he had nothing else to do. His dad was gone, or his dad wasn't present, his mom wasn't present, and then they felt like it was the end of their life. There was no need to be around, and it's like like we have to be that present. And you've hit on all of these things throughout this conversation, and the fact that you're able to talk about a lot of stuff. Your birth mother, committing suicide, and she was reaching out for somebody for help. And the presence wasn't there. Granted, that wasn't a father figure that we're hitting on here, but just be there, be aware of where you're at and the people you're communicating with. And I don't know where exactly I'm going with this, but man, I just felt like I had to say some of that, because it's far too often I've seen a lot of that stuff go south. And talking to a father like you that is doing what he can to be as present as possible and have those conversations, whether it's I think that having those types of conversations lead to the future conversations that are very difficult. They make them that much easier.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll pause for commentary from you, because I'll ramble a lot. So
no, you're absolutely right. It's the time now, right? When you talk about the stages, right, of our boys, idolizing us, fighting against us, and then revering us later on in future, respecting us. If we've done it right in that first stage, hopefully that second stage is much smaller.
Yes.
And it's much more comfortable to talk about. And I've told my 11-year-old, I've said, listen, there's going to be a time where you think I'm wrong all the time, but experience is on my side, and I'm just trying to give you a shorter path to success than I had. And having those conversations, I think, does that, to where hopefully they get to that other stage much faster. And I've got friends that are still angry with their dads, but I've got a lot of friends that are, their dad's their best friend, and they go fishing and boating and do all these things with them. And it's really cool to see that, and to tap into those guys and say, like, how are you guys best friends now? What did you do different? And I find, going back to our conversation on communication, that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was being truthful, and it was being integral, and it was being open. When we're able to communicate hardships, but we're also able to communicate successes and victories with our kids, that they see that's genuine to them. But if we're only just saying, well, I'm only going to tell you about the things that I did right, it's going to leave a big gaping hole for them to wonder, what did dad do wrong? Because you may be able to fool them for a while, but eventually they're going to figure it out. And when they figure it out, you don't want it to be, oh, dad was a liar. He told me all this stuff, but he did all this other stuff. Like, I don't trust him now.
Yeah. I think that my daughter just showed up. Hi, come here. I'm losing track of what I was going to say now, but we're gonna have Diana come and say hello. Come here, little lady. She's reaching for me. Give her to me. So this is my little 5-month-old. What's up? Say hi.
Amazing.
Oh yeah, eat that microphone.
Yeah,
every
get
time.
After it.
Every time she just eats that microphone up. I don't know what it sounds like on your side when she does that, but yeah. For those who are not watching, yeah, well, I would imagine not. Well, hi, yeah, my little precious little girl. Huh? Yeah, she's so excited. Thank you. I agree. She is.
You let her keep going. You're not going to be able to do this podcast much longer.
I know, but I just going to short the microphone out on me. Oh man. But I don't even remember what I was saying now. Completely got distracted by my little lady coming in. But
yeah,
you were talking about being a liar. your kid looking at you as a liar. Hey, let me talk, little lady. Here, let me hand her back. I love you. Thank you. Again, one of the blessings of being able to work from home is I get
That's
visitors visiting from my kiddos.
Yeah.
But the way that our kids look at us in one way, shape, or form, if all we do is push out those successes, and this is something that I needed to be. This is where I was going. Something that I really need to be aware of. I'm glad that I was able to work that through my brain to finally come up with what I was going to say. My son, as a lot of sons do, want to mimic what I do, like want to do the things that I do and all that stuff, right? So if I'm only talking about my successes, that with my oldest especially, and I haven't seen it yet with my my youngest boy, but my oldest boy especially, he will. If all I ever talk about was those successes, then he's going to think that he is failing miserably because he has failures. And we all have failures. So if we're not representing that failure, if we're not showing that these things happen, and that's something that I used to ask him all the time, and we've kind of dropped the ball a little bit on asking him more recently. Like, what did you fail at today? Because I want you to fail at things. If you're not failing at things, you're not trying hard, right? You're not pushing yourself. So I want you to fail at things, and I want you to see what I fail at. And so I think it's extremely important to have those conversations about what you did wrong and what you failed at, and
absolutely
represent it.
My son, my youngest, the other day, I said, if you do X, I think it was, if you eat all your lunch, you'll get a cookie after school and, whatever. Right. So I set the parameters, and then something shifted in his mind. He thought he did what was expected, and I didn't give him the reward that he thought he deserved. In my mind, it was very clear, and I can't remember the whole story, but he said, "Dad, you're a liar." And I stopped him and I said, "Hudson, let's build one truth right now. I will never lie to you." I said, "I will always tell you the truth. It may not be what you want to hear or how you want to hear it, but I'll always tell you the truth." I said, if I lie to you, then you have the right to call me a liar. But on this instance, you don't get to call me a liar, because I've worked really hard to never lie to you, to never tell you something that's untruthful. So when if that ever occurs, you can call me out, but this isn't it. And it really shaped how he spoke to me afterwards. And he actually came up in his 7-year-old heart and said, "Dad, I'm sorry I called you a liar. You're not. You're a great dad." But I wanted to make sure my wife, my sons, that they know I'm never going to lie to them. But if I did, they have full authority to call me out on it. And holding ourselves accountable, I think, is incredibly important.
I have an odd, polarizing question for you about being a liar. That is, it's more of a softer, funnier type of side. What are your thoughts on Santa Claus?
Well, my kids already, they've known. I told my kids from the first time they asked, is Santa Claus real? I was like, I won't answer this question just yet, but go look at our chimney. Watch what you see on TV about Santa Claus. Do you think he's real? And they're like, no, he could never fit down our chimney. And then we immediately moved, ironically, to a house that had no chimney. And they said, "Dad, when are you going to put the presents in front of the tree?" And I said, "Oh, what do you mean? Santa's coming." And they're like, "Dad, we have no chimney. He can't come unless he comes through the front door." So they've known for a long time that Santa wasn't real. And I'm sorry for all those dads that have been telling their kids that Santa's real.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of not telling my kids that Santa's real ever. Like I'll still put though on the presents, like from Santa on some of the presents, because it's fun and I might as well play with it, right? Because to me, there's a difference between pretend and playing pretend with my kids and lying to my kids. And I have always felt that like that was like the starting point of lying to my kids. Or the starting point of them thinking of me as a liar. Like when they finally realize there is no Santa, and I've been telling them for years that there is, now, like, what else has Dad been telling me that is not true?
Sure.
And so that's where I've kind of got stuck.
Yeah, and I think there's got to be some room for self-discovery.
Yeah.
Right? My 7-year-old just lost. He's got like half a mouthful of teeth because half of them fallen out. And I've said, oh yeah, the tooth fairy's coming to provide you, money for your teeth. And it was a couple weeks ago where I'm reaching under his pillow to grab the tooth and put in $1. And he looks at me and he's like, "You're not the tooth fairy." I said, "Well, I am," and now he jokes about it and he'll say, "I can't believe I thought the tooth fairy was real." And, so to answer your question, I did tell him there's a tooth fairy. So am I lying, or am I in that realm of make believe and letting kids be kids? I think there is a place where you let kids be, explore, right, and figure it out. And eventually, the tooth fairy and the Easter bunny and Santa Claus and all those things are going to wash out, whether that's a lie or not. I don't think that's my place to choose.
Yeah. Well, that's why I told you I'm going on a weird direction on that one. But the tooth fairy, I still, even with my kids losing teeth, boy, of course my dog is on the bark right now in the back. I don't know if you can hear him, but I would venture to guess you can. My son, my oldest, is the only one who's lost teeth yet. My youngest hasn't. But goodness gracious, dog. Goodness. I don't know if we pulled out the vacuum or what, but he is not happy, whatever is going on out there. So here's to add more craziness, in case an 8-year-old boy, a 4-year-old boy, and a 5-month-old girl is not enough. We got now a 10-week-old puppy running around the house. So
perfect.
It's wise move, Adam.
Yeah.
And it's a Belgian Malinois, so he's like crazy and loving life. But yeah, I still to this day will joke with Adam about the tooth fairy, and he's like, "Come on!" Like there's sometimes where he gets like almost upset. I know it's not Dad. Just tell me that the tooth fairy's not real. We know the tooth fairy's not real.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, the tooth fairy's totally going to bring you this money. And that like one day we forgot to put the money underneath there, and he was like, "Dad." And I was like, "Dude, you didn't believe in the tooth fairy, so the tooth fairy didn't bring you the stuff. Like, I don't know what to tell you." Like, so we joked around
Joke's
about
on
it.
you.
And my 4-year-old, we call them cousin twins, because they were in the same grade. My 4-year-old and my niece, they went to the same school. They were in the same grade. Like they are like two peas in a pod. And he was riding home, and he was like, "Well, I mean, it's something about Santa not being real." And they believe in Santa. Their kids believe in Santa still. And she's like, "Santa is real." And then my sister-in-law's like, "Yeah, Rourke, in this car, Santa is real." And I've tried to tell him, like, don't tell anybody else. Like, it's not your role to correct anybody if they think Santa's real. It's no big deal. Just let them believe what they believe. There's other kids, just don't tell them that. He's like, "Why don't you guys believe me? Santa Claus is not real." So Santa's not real. Oh, and there's the 4-year-old. Man, we're getting them all today. What's up, buddy? What's up, dude? Hey, is Santa Claus real?
No.
Why not? Why don't you think so? Because he isn't? All right, well, I guess that's as good of an answer as any. Boy, and the puppy just showed up. Oh, my goodness, we got the whole crew
There you
here.
go.
Again, for those of you who are only listening, you're missing out. Got to get on the YouTube and check it out there, too.
Two kids and a dog.
Man.
You're missing one. You got the whole family.
She's standing right outside the door, so it's, But yeah, I always have fun still with it now with the tooth fairy and Santa Claus. But all right, oh man. Anyways, so what is there? I think that we're finally hitting a wrapping point here with everybody showing up in the office. It seems like it's time to wrap this up.
It must be lunchtime.
It must be something. Hey, there we go. Got everybody other than my wife. But all right, well, the dog's probably out peeing on the floor somewhere. So. Because the dog left the office.
Enjoy that.
But so tell if anybody who's listening wants to reach out to you, whether it's for the coaching stuff, whether it's for real estate stuff, tell everyone how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, well, we have a website for our real estate development. It's at www.aspire, ASPIRE dev.com or devgroup.com. Most people find me on LinkedIn. That's where most people hit me up about coaching and doing some one-on-one stuff or coming out to speak to their organization. But I'm really excited. I've got a new podcast myself that we just launched. And so we're showing up on a weekly basis, and that's michaelandjohn.com. And it's called The Second Act. It's just about transitioning from something into something else and doing it with support. And we're trying to provide that support. So little secrets from us who are transitioning currently and getting into the next chapter. So
that's awesome. I wish we would have dug into that. I had that in my notes to chat with you about that podcast, because I love the concept. I've as a guy who's transitioned multiple times across multiple different things, and you and I obviously transitioning from the military into a new world, a new life. It's definitely an important thing to talk about, because right back to the communication side, if we're not talking about those hardships, we're not talking about those things that are difficult, whether it's a job transition, a marriage transition, a life transition, whatever the transition, the communication side of it is extremely important. So sorry, you're about to say something.
No, I the point of that whole podcast is to show people that you can come from this really high place, this mountaintop. Right. It felt like I was leaving from in the Marine Corps, and you want to go from mountaintop to mountaintop, but that doesn't typically happen. It can, but there's these valleys, and I want to show people that struggle and kind of my journey and how I'm going from this mountaintop down to this low valley and how it sucks. And I'm just kind of grinding it out, trying to figure out what makes things work and what sticks, and getting over imposter syndrome. And so I'm trying to display that in real life so that other people can jump on board and say, well, shoot, if that guy can do it, I can definitely do it. So awesome.
Yeah, that's, again, you are the 5 people you hang around with most. So if you can surround yourself with folks who are doing what you're doing, whatever transition you're at in life, finding the right people to be around makes a huge difference. But is there anything else that you want to cover before we actually leave? Any questions you have? Anything you want to, any parting guidance or advice or thoughts you have? And for all I know, this could be another 40 minutes if we go down this route. So, which I'm perfectly fine with.
Adam, it's just what I'd say is encouragement. It's great to see another dad who takes being a dad seriously.
Yeah.
Right. We get one chance at this opportunity, and we get one chance, at marriage. I mean, not really. People get lots of chances if they want them. But if you go into it with the right mindset, you only need one chance. And I think we as dads just have to really take our time seriously and realize the importance of our role, importance of the daily decisions that we make in front of our kids, in front of our wife, for our families, and how we act outside the house determines how we act inside, garbage in, garbage out. And so I just wanted to say how much I appreciated you for what you're doing in real time in front of everybody with your kids and the podcast and living that out with excellence. So great job.
Well, I don't know about how much excellence, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So it's, if I am doing my job right, they're going to be, like I said, better men than me. So, hopefully I'm doing it right. And the only way I'll find out is when they're off doing their thing. So hopefully time will tell. But thank you so very much, John, for jumping on. You were a pleasure to chat with, as I knew you would be. I'm sure we could go on for another 3-4 hours, maybe bring you back on again and have more conversations about this.
Done.
But and hopefully we can meet up in person at some point for hopefully our paths get to cross in some way, shape, or form. But thank you so much for everything you're doing as a dad. Thank you for your service, doing what you did for the country. It was a pleasure chatting with you and getting to know you. And hopefully one of my 2 listeners will reach out to you. So, but thanks again, John. And thank you everybody for listening. Please reach out to John if you're looking for a coach or some real estate investment stuff. So thank you everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.
See ya.